The COVID-19 pandemic severely affected our education as a traditional or face-to-face interaction cannot take place. Due to the implemented quarantine and health protocols, other modes are utilized to ensure that education can still be delivered despite the challenges brought by the pandemic. Online multimedia learning is one of the solutions that our government and institutions came up, but are these really effective, especially when retaining information? What are the elements that we should consider to enhance our retention? Good day, everyone!
Our group will present to you our research regarding the effects of personalization principle to the memory retention of college students.
The research is entitled Do You Remember? Personalization Effect in Memory Retention of College Students from Far Eastern University. My name is Jennifer Garcia. Together with me are my group mates.
My name is John Andrew Evia.
I am Ren Howell Ragonjan.
I'm Chrizelle and Leobrera from Section 5 of Cognitive Psychology.
Avenues for learning have been increasingly developed through the years, from book-based environments which only consisted of text and illustrations up to the computer-based environments. Due to the accessibility of the use of the internet, online classes and other platforms are now heavily utilized, most especially in the current situation of the world where face-to-face interaction cannot materialize because of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, research regarding the effectiveness of multimedia learning, its factors and techniques are still limited until today. Such media may not be effective if content creators have included factors that might not facilitate efficient retention of information. In line with this current trend, this piqued our interest to explore more about the facets of multimedia learning to foster and improve retention of information.
Next is the background of the study. One factor of multimedia learning that the researchers wanted to delve into is the technique of personalization by Mayer et al. 2004, which uses first and second person pronouns such as I, you, your, and our, or a conversational type of narration than using the typically formal, neutral, or monologue type of narration in multimedia learning. In the experiment of Mayer regarding the effect of personalization in multimedia learning, the researchers utilized the process of respiration as the learning material for the participants to learn during the experiment. The current researchers wish to replicate the experiment of Mayer. However, due to the restraints of the current situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, a face-to-face experiment cannot occur. The researchers tried to modify the procedures such as conducting the video presentation online as well as their responses, but the test created by Mayer will still be used to measure retention and will be further discussed in methodology. Next is the research question. The current study aims to answer if there is a significant difference in the retention of information between the formal and personalized style of narration in multimedia instructional messages. With that being said, the researchers decided to hypothesize that on average, there is no significant difference in retention of information between the personalized and non-personalized style of narration in a multimedia material. Next is the significance of the study. The findings of this study would be largely beneficial to educators and content creators, as this could serve as a guide as to what kinds of interventions would increase interest and engagement and can help design better and more engaging learning materials. Students will also benefit from the study to improve the quality as well as to reduce extraneous factors which could impair the effectiveness of multimedia learning. Lastly, it will be great beneficial to educational institutions in terms of catering to the needs of every individual regardless of their preferred medium of learning.
So for theoretical framework, the theory that was used in this study is Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So this theory provided empirical guidelines and frameworks that would be helpful for retention of multimedia instruction thoroughly. So the best way to showcase multimedia learning instruction was through the form of visual graphics and informal voice narration. This theory has two main assumptions. First, the multimedia presentation should be designed in ways that could reduce the cognitive load. Second, multiple representations help and hone the learning of an individual in a particular material. There are three approaches regarding the personalization effect that increases the memory retention. First, higher social presence, which states that cognitive processing increases because they feel more connected to the author and learner engages more effort in learning material. Second, learners exert less effort to translate due to familiarity of personal messages. It also overlapses the idea of self-reference since that the self is a very familiar learner. Lastly, a stronger self-reference. As explained by the self-reference effect in the chapter 6, people tend to understand pieces of information easier if they use themselves as their point of reference. For methodology, participants and sample size. This is carried out by Zoom to the Far Eastern University, which included 30 college students as the sample size. The setup has control group and personalized group who both had 15 participants. The pie charts that are presented shows the division of demographic variables of the participants based on age, sex, and institute. Sampling technique and research method. This study is a cross-sectional study based on the voluntary participation of college students. The researchers chose to gather participants from different programs who voluntarily wanted to partake in this study. Thus, the researchers used convenient sampling as a sampling method where the sample was obtained by selecting individual participants who are easy to get or available, as long as they have passed the criteria of being a college student and did not garner a high score specifically ranging from 10 to 12 in points in the participant questionnaire, because having prior knowledge about learning material may influence the performance of the participant greatly. Random assignment was also done in order to eliminate any bias or contamination by letting the participants pick a number through an online drawlat to determine which group of participants there would be assigned. This study used experimental research method to investigate the effect of personalized and non-personalized style of multimedia learning through memory retention. The researchers used a between subjects design where the independent variable is manipulated between two or more participants. The between subject design has certain advantages that fit the nature of the experiment, such as the guarantee no transfer effects and eliminate bias due to random assignment. So for the instruments, the researchers adapted the instruments based on the description and illustration that the previous researchers have stated. It consists of experience questionnaire and retention test sheet, which were converted into Google Forms and Google Docs. The participant questionnaire requires the participants to fill up their basic demographic information, including age, sex, and institute. It also consists of a two-part experience survey, which consisted of 7-item checklist and 1-item rating scale to measure the participants' knowledge and experience about the material, specifically the process of the respiratory system, in order to know if the participants would be qualified to proceed into the experiment. The retention test was a recall task to measure the memory retention of the students by recalling the process of respiration, specifically each element or units mentioned in the video. The computer-based materials consist of 2 videos, the personalized and non-personalized version of multimedia program, which explain the process of the respiratory system of the humans. SAI tool and Sony Vegas program were utilized to draw each frame and to combine this into an animation. Both of the presentation were about 60 seconds long and had the same animation, but each had a different accompanying 100-word narration, one with a personalized narration and the other had non-personalized narration. The narration was spoken by a male voice with a standard and average accent.
Participants were randomly assigned through an online drawlats, which would decide which group they would belong. Either the control group, which has a non-personalized or formal style of narration, or the treatment group, which has a conversational style of narration. The participants were tested in groups of 4 to 6. The experimenter would give a Zoom link for participants who were assigned to non-personalized video and another link to personalized video. The experimenter explained the brief overview of the experiment, but not mentioning the intention of the experiment. The participants were given an informed consent through Google Forms to brief them about their rights as participants. Their participation is voluntary. They can withdraw at any given moment. The harm of the experiment is minimized and their responses were kept confidential. After the participants signed an agreement of their participation, they were given a participant questionnaire to complete at their own rate and to evaluate their knowledge about the respiratory system. The experiment was conducted promptly for 8 minutes. The participants were instructed to watch a 1-minute video about the process of human respiration. The personalized or non-personalized video was presented on the screen depending on which group they belong. After viewing the video, the participants were given a Google Docs link where they answer retention test for 5 minutes. After the test, the participants were debriefed about the main objectives and practical significance of the experiment.
Next is the scoring. A participant questionnaire is used, which is a 12-point scale and was calculated by tallying the number of items checked with the participant on the checklist, combining it with a score in the rating scale by giving 1 to 5 points for the 5 possible answers, ranging from 1 for very low to 5 for very high. The participants were also given a retention test. The retention test was scored by counting off the number of idea units that had the same thought or meaning as the one of the 20 units in the multimedia presentation. Overall, a participant can have a maximum possible score of 20 points in the retention test. Next is statistical treatment. The experimenters used descriptive statistics to know which group scored the highest in the retention test. Moreover, to check the statistical significance of the results, an independent t-test was used in order to compare the scores garnered whether the groups have significant differences.
So here are the results. For the descriptive analysis of the participant experience questionnaire, based on the Table 1, all of them have an average knowledge about learning material that has a mean of 6.933 and standard deviation of 1.639. Meanwhile, in the Table 2, on average, the group who had watched the personalized video has a mean of 6.133 and standard deviation of 2.356, scored higher in the retention test compared to those group who have watched the non-personalized group who have mean of 1.33 and standard deviation of 2.554. However, in order to know if these differences in mean between each group have significance, parametric tests were warranted through independent t-test.
To check if there is a significance between their differences, an independent samples t-test was used to compare the effects of non-personalized and personalized version of narration as a learning material in the performance of retention. The hypothesis stated that on average, there is no significant difference in the performance on retention between personalized and non-personalized groups. The result, as shown from Table 3, had supported the hypothesis because it yielded a non-significant result with 0.380. Therefore, there was a non-significant difference between non-personalized and personalized groups in terms of their scores in the retention test. And to further elaborate and interpret our results, here is Chrizelle, Leanne, Leobrera.
And next, we have the discussion. The hypothesis of the study stated that, on average, there is no significant difference in the tension of information between the personalized and non-personalized style of narration in a multimedia platform learning. From the data and statistical analysis gathered, the hypothesis of the study was supported, as the result indicated that there was a non-significant difference within the conditions. In a study conducted by Mayer and his colleagues, the result also yielded similar findings, in which personalization have no effect on retention. This can be explained by one of the assumptions of cognitive load theory of multimedia learning, which is that cognitive load hurts learning. The working memory of a person is limited in the amount it can hold, hence, when it is presented with multiple representation, it can produce overload in the person. It was also mentioned that multiple representation can be effortlessly fused together when prior knowledge were presented, and the tendency to overload the working memory were less. In the present study, prior knowledge of the participant were measured through a scale, and if the participants scored higher than average, they were excluded to partake in the experiment. Therefore, the participants gathered in the study were only those who have average to little prior knowledge from the topic. Additionally, individual interest plays a vital role in higher attention, cognitive processing, and task persistence during learning experience. This explains that interest, specifically individual interest, can be a useful variable for the processing and the result or learning a specific material. Therefore, when learners are presented with the new learning material, one can expect that it will be processed differently depending on the learner's individual interests. However, this contradicts the assumption of self-reference, where it states that it increases the learner's interest, which encourages the learners to use all available cognitive capacity for active processing. It should also be noted that self-reference is more focused on the learning and comprehension of the stimulus itself rather than retention. The present study also gathered an average scores of 5 to 6 in retention, which is in line with Miller's magical number 7, which states that a person's capacity for working memory can only hold up to 5 to 9 items for a few seconds, and if not rehearsed, the information will be lost. And lastly, for the conclusions, the researchers found out that the group with the personalized learning material scored significantly higher in retention tests compared to the group with the formal learning material. And the researchers suggest for the future researchers to investigate the personalization effect to the comprehension of the students, conduct the experiment in a controlled setting, and choose a different set of population.